Hey everybody, this is Perch. I'm not a fan of deconstruction in general in comics, but that doesn't mean it's not a useful tool. Deconstruction can be well applied to a character, particularly a character who's in a right zone in order to use it or to need it to actually evolve who they are and kind of where they're going. There's a few characters where I think it's definitely needed. Now, of course, deconstruction also means different things to different people. Deconstruction had once upon a time, and even with the Avengers, you remember Brian Michael Bendis did the Avengers Deconstructed Arc, and what it basically was kind of the adventures of the Avengers had gotten into not exactly a rut, but sort of. It was a number of plot lines had kind of converged and weren't making good progress. They had shifted kind of a number of characters, a number of writers, kind of on and off the book. You may remember Jeff Johns was on the book for a little while, and Bendis was on a book. There was like 3 or 4 other writers during this period. And so the deconstruction that was used there was basically, hey, let's pull apart the team. Let's kind of create a finale or in need of a restart. And he used it to lead into the New Avengers, and it was a successful use of deconstruction. The thing about deconstruction is I think sometimes people think about the construction bit that comes after the deconstruction. Like after we've taken everything apart, then it's got to tee up building from there. And so this person, a viewer to the channel, writes in, when is deconstruction needed in comics? The mail goes, when does a character need to be deconstructed? Like what you said Carol Danvers needed to be in one of your most recent videos. I know deconstruction is overused in comics, and nowadays characters rarely end up reconstructed afterwards. Exactly. What are some of the most successful deconstructions and reconstructions of superheroes to serve as an example of it done well? Well, I think there have been plenty. I think the Daredevil, of course, the Born Again saga, I think is a good example of that. I would argue that the Batman breaking the back, the whole Bane storyline, all that kind of stuff, it was definitely a '90s style deconstruction, which has meant it was much stunt as it was story, but there was a story there, and it was Bruce kind of climbing back. And at the time that Batman was going on, at that moment in the character series, it proved to be quite useful in building back some interest and some motivation, some drive back into the comic. I think, as I mentioned, the Avengers, the deconstruction, it was a good time for them to do that. But not all deconstructions are considered equal. I think the one that has become popular more recently is, and in many cases it's Tom King who does it. It's this mini maxi series where they deconstruct, say, Adam Strange, or they deconstruct Mr. Miracle, and it's that's an example of a deconstruction done very, very poorly, in the sense that you get the deconstruction, but it's unclear a little bit why. Was Adam Strange clamoring for a deconstruction? Not really. Adam Strange was a barely used character at DC at that moment, and wasn't a lot going on with him. And so the opportunity to actually, take the character and do something, it was kind of not a blank slate exactly, but it was right there to have lots of adventures with the character and do some interesting things. It hadn't hit that wall where a deconstruction can really prove valuable. And as you identified, there was no reconstruction at the other end. There was no, all right, now here's how we build it up, or build someone up. I mean, the end of that story ends with Strange getting killed, and his wife is basically there. Mr. Terrific is there, but none of it enhanced his wife. None of it enhanced Mr. Terrific. The whole it reconstructed or built nobody. We're going through that right now with Chance and the Justice League, the Bwahaha era of the Justice League, where we're seeing this happen with Guy Gardner, with Ice, with Fire, with Martian Manhunter. In another one of Tom King's series, we saw it with Mr. Miracle, where they deconstructed scot-free Mr. Miracle. And now we have, they basically have said, screw it. We're going to just have Shiloh, Mr. Miracle, for a while because we don't even know what to do with this. That's where it's at. Now, granted, a lot of the Tom King series, these maxi series, the gimmick is deconstruction. There's no promise of reconstruction on the other end. And many of them are at least said they take place in a different multiverse, or it's not in continuity. But then everything is kind of in continuity, and some of Tom King's stuff does apply and some doesn't, and it's confusing where it is. I mean, the general rule of thumb seems to be, hey, if it's real popular and people buy a lot of it and they want more, then it's in our universe and we'll work with it. And if it just kind of slides by, then it's in its own thing. Don't worry about it. I love that kind of sliding scale of whether you should care about the continuity or not. That's wonderful. But that's kind of where the series sits at the moment. And if you look at Heroes in Crisis, for example, we deconstructed Wally West. We took him and we added some huge deconstruction. The entire idea of Heroes Therapy was a way to deconstruct and add depression and angst and everything else to these characters, which they did. But the problem is, again, there's with most of them, there was nothing on the other end. The characters just kind of existed there, and it created a huge mess. They've had to go to bizarre lengths to get Roy Harper back to life. And then you have the Wally West. You've had kind of the Scott Lobdell and Brett Booth series that rehabbed him, and then they did something. Then they kind of took him back down again, and they like, no, it wasn't him at all. And then it's just been a convoluted mess to get that character back to where it's sellable again. So when does deconstruction work? Well, the biggest example in my mind is you've run into a bit of a trap with the character, and one of the ways that you run into the traps, you do it to yourself. So that's why I think Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, is a perfect character for deconstruction. Carol Danvers had a lot of depth and a lot of nuance as a character. She, they were doing the whole storyline where she was an alcoholic during the Avengers Kurt Busiek run, and then in her solo Brian Reed run? Yeah, Brian Reed. They did more with her in that. They kind of had her battle and overcome kind of a lot of these pieces of her personality, and it was good. It was adding complexity. Now, they never really got around to providing a great set of villains or a good foil for Carol, but still, there was a lot of depth. And then when they went down the track of she's the most powerful character, she's super popular, and this is a centerpiece of Marvel during the kind of 2012 to 2018 run of Captain Marvel, particularly when Kelly Sue was writing her, that they sucked away any flaw and any depth to that character, and she became an extremely one-dimensional character, and it didn't take. So deconstruction would work really well, where you get in there and you're like, hey, here's how we're going to make the character have some flaws, have some things they have to battle against, have some, maybe a very clever villain that's smarter and more powerful. I mean, one of the best things that could happen to Carol is introduce a villain that is smarter than her, stronger than her, kind of outwits her, and have that character defeat Carol and take her down a few pegs. And then Carol kind of rallies and goes after her, and the villain wins again. Have this villain slip through her fingers a little bit. Sort of in the same way that, for a while they were doing this with Lex Luthor, where Superman knew he was up to some dirty shit, but, he's like, too rich, too powerful, too connected. He's able to manipulate from the sidelines. And so it became a good foil for Superman, and it worked. Superman's all powerful, and he's got, he did terrific strength, and he could do all these different things. But this Lex Luthor was smarter than he was. They were able to establish that as a great villain who could defeat Superman. Carol needs the same thing. She needs a villain who defeats her a little bit to make her struggle, and in many ways to tear apart some pieces of this kind of one-dimensional fortress they built around her. She can use deconstruction. If you did that, she'd become a far more likable, far more well-rounded character that you can do some pretty cool things with. I do think Carol as Captain Marvel has a lot of potential as a character, but you've got to really, subtract some of the invincibility that she's got. In weird ways, she has the problem that a writers complain Superman has, which is, there's very little you can throw at her. She's going to win. She's going to win relatively. You have to go through bizarre scenarios in order to have her struggle, because she's overclocked, overpowered, and it takes a lot of the drama out of the series, and you need that drama. So Carol Danvers would be a really good one. Over in the DC universe, it's a little bit more tricky, because they have, they've gone to the well a little bit too often with deaths that don't necessarily mean anything. So who do you kind of really take apart and put back together? If you're Aquaman, no, I don't think he needs deconstruction. I think they've done that fairly recently. Hal Jordan, no. We've seen it happen with Wally. There doesn't make a lot of sense to do it with Barry. Cyborg might benefit from some deconstruction. In many cases, I think the characters that, and I hate the term, but became almost the Mary Sue like, and I think this could be applied to men and women, but basically these invincible, can't be beaten characters that are typically non-white male superheroes. They tend to overdo it. A lot of those characters could use some focus and some deconstruction. Again, not to ruin them, but to actually put some focus on the character, give them some flaws, give them some things to overcome so they can be heroic. That would likely wind up making them more popular and more powerful than they are today. I think people get worried about it because it's like, oh man, if we take Cyborg, for example, and we really screw with him and we make his life, very, very difficult. And they do this with Cyborg. I mean, they've tried a few times, like, oh no, his machine parts are getting the better of him, and he's losing some of his humanity. But it's always, it feels like this half-hearted storyline that they do, and it's always the same. Rather than do that, how about you do something where his mind is he's getting to. It's kind of like the thing you did with the Vision. Start really toying with the idea that his humanity is going away, and so he's making more cold and calculating decisions, and this is driving him apart from his friends and the people who've always been his teammates, and it's causing him to struggle in a different way because he's trying to, instead of holding on to his humanity from a physical standpoint, have it be more of a mental, emotional standpoint that he struggles against. There could be something you do there, I think. You probably, I don't know. I think the most interesting part about this John Kent storyline that they're doing right now is if they do reveal that, yeah, Jay Nakamura is his Lex Luthor and is actually sadistic and evil and totally screwed him and wound up not literally screwed, but you understand what I mean. Anyway, I think doing something like that allows you to kind of take that character apart a little bit. I mean, anytime you get a character who's just too overclocked, too powerful, too smug with their own abilities, deconstruction can be something you can use to kind of reset the clock a little bit. But you have to do it carefully. And the most important part of deconstruction, and this is the key point, you got to construct afterward. The deconstruction is step one of a two-step process. And if you just do step one and you kind of bail on step two, you get nowhere, and I wouldn't recommend that for anyone. Anyway, that's my answer. What do you think? If you're a listener right now, you probably have your own opinions. Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for listening.